What species is the fetus?
The fetus is not a species yet. It's technically classified as a parasite until it is viable.
So
Yet another pro-abortion argument bites the dust. They love to claim that a fetus is a parasite, but in reality, a parasite is an organism that lives in or on another organism of a different species. There's that key phrase there that they just always conveniently forget. A different species. And I know this is a shocker, but a human fetus is a human. A human mother gestates another human. It is human DNA. And it is nonsense to claim that a fetus is somehow a non-species, that it has no classification whatsoever, and yet it's living and gestating inside of the mother. That's ridiculous. And of course, it can't be a different species. It's not a cat, it's not a dog, it's not a horse. It's human. It has to have a species, and it's human. And that is verifiable. It's human.
Hold on, I can't let you get past that. Are you saying a baby is a disease or a tumor?
A parasite is not a disease and a tumor. Those are not the same thing. A parasite is defined as something that cannot survive outside of its host. A baby, before it is viable, cannot survive outside of a woman's womb.
Got it. So let's extrapolate that.
It is not a living organism.
So she says that because a baby, before it's viable, cannot survive outside of his mother, he's not a living organism. Well, two things with this. Whenever someone says this, I love to ask, okay, so then do you agree that abortion post-viability should be illegal because it is in fact immoral? And more often than not, they will backtrack and say, no, they don't actually think it should be illegal. So they make this arbitrary distinction about viability, but if you question them a little bit further, more often than not, they will in fact admit that it's arbitrary, that they actually still think abortion should be permitted post-viability. So unnecessarily killing a baby that could survive on his own if you would just induce delivery or perform a C-section. So there's that. But then also she says that it's not alive because it can't survive on its own. Being able to survive on your own is not, in fact, one of the qualifications of life, right? The qualifications of life are all, in fact, things that a fetus does or will do. So a fetus is absolutely alive in utero, barring miscarriage. Absolutely human. We've covered that. And he's doing these biological processes with the help of his mother, obviously, but there is no such thing as you're not alive unless you can sustain yourself. And in fact, Charlie's about to make a good point about people who are on their deathbed, people who are sick, people who are disabled. They are not able to sustain themselves. There are people who are on breathing machines. There are people who need help eating. They're not able to sustain themselves. A newborn baby is not able to survive on his own. In fact, he, very much like a baby in utero, requires his mother's body, requires his mother's body to feed off of. He is not able to survive on his own. And yet we value his life. And why is that? Well, because we can see that he's human, we can feel that he's human, we can relate to him. He's not having a similar experience to us. He's not able to feed himself. He's not able to get himself dressed. He's not able to change himself. He's not conscious. He's not having a self-reflective experience. And yet we understand that he's human because we can see, touch, and feel him. He was human in utero. He was alive in utero. But because we can't see, touch, or feel him, especially if we're not the mother, we disregard his humanity. But in fact, again, there is no qualification for life that requires you to be able to survive on your own, whatever that means. We do not devalue someone based off of his or her inability to survive on their own. And in fact, if you want to extrapolate this to really the nth degree, most of us can't survive on our own unless you're some kind of wilderness junkie out in the backwoods all by yourself, okay? Most of us rely on other people, including on other people's labor, on their bodies, in order for us to eat, to have shelter, to survive. So none of us really survive on our own, and yet we recognize the inherent value of every single living, genetically distinct human life.
People with Alzheimer's and dementia that are being assisted every day, are they parasites?
No, they're not parasites. They're human beings who are on the brink of death.
Got it. So
they're not going to be able to survive.
My 4-month-old that requires mom's breast milk and requires daily changes and feedings cannot survive without its own. Is my 4-month-old a parasite?
Your baby can breathe on its own. Your baby can drink water from its mouth to its stomach.
And therein lies one of the issues with every single pro-abortion argument. Every single pro-abortion argument is a slippery slope. And if you follow it to its natural conclusion, you're talking about serious human rights violations, which is because abortion is a human rights violation. And so the same logic that justifies abortion is the same logic that's used to justify other human rights violations. It's a very slippery slope, folks, because actually, yes, if you think that someone who doesn't contribute to society and survive on his own and is able to do all these things and needs another person, needs an outside external resource, if you think of him as a parasite, that's a very utilitarian view of your fellow man, and it's only going to get worse from there.
But it cannot,
Your baby can
it
eat
hunt?
food.
Can it gather? Can it reason?
But that's not what qualifies something as being a living organism. Being a living organism simply means, can you survive outside of a womb, outside of your host?
Got it. So I just...
Again, biologically, that is not one of the characteristics of life. It is not a requirement for life. And this is another issue with pro-abortion arguments. They just make up junk science, whatever suits the moment, which is pretty ironic for the side that constantly claims science. The ability to survive on your own, quote unquote, outside of the uterus is not a characteristic of life.
I want to make sure I'm clear. Why does that then equate to moral viability?
It equates to scientific viability.
Why? Under what standard?
Because it is not alive, and you are advocating for the rights of something that is not technically a life.
Got it. So what is something
while
that has
sacrificing the needs of the human woman who is alive.
Got it.
Again, barring miscarriage, a human fetus is alive. And a human fetus is always human. And what the pro-abortion side continues to do is deny the humanity, to deny the value of an entire one half of this equation. Pregnancy is a totally incomparable situation in which you have one human life, genetically distinct, who requires, through no fault of his own, through no culpability of his own, another human body for a temporary amount of time in order to survive. And the pro-abortion side constantly projects. They claim that we don't care about women, we hate women, whatever. But in fact, it's the opposite. They don't care about the preborn human. They want to deny the humanity of the preborn human. In reality, the pro-life side simply wants to love and care and honor the value in both mother and offspring, because in fact, they are both human. They are both alive, barring some type of fatal disruption, and they are both valuable. They are both worthy of care and consideration, and they want to continually deny that.
So, but a mom can survive
Yes.
without the baby in her, right?
Yes.
The baby cannot survive without the mom,
Yes.
but a mom cannot survive without her lungs. So it's not her body, it's in her body. It's not her DNA, so it's not her choice.
Charlie's correct. Of course, it is not the mother's body. It requires the mother's body for a time in order to survive. When a mother is pregnant with a boy, for example, we don't say that she has a member. We don't say that she has 4 hands or 4 feet. We understand distinctly, fundamentally, when a baby's wanted, we understand that he's in fact not part of the mother's body. And that is why in certain states, if you commit homicide against a pregnant woman, you are charged twice. Because we understand at a fundamental level, no matter what you think about abortion, we understand that in fact a human fetus, barring miscarriage, is alive.
So it
actually is directly her DNA. It is 100%. It's 50%.
In fact, it is not the mother's DNA. It is a genetically distinct set of DNA from the moment of fertilization. At fertilization, a whole individuated, genetically distinct living human organism is formed, and all the DNA required to grow into the baby, the toddler, the teenager, the adult that you'll eventually become, it's present from fertilization. Of course, the mother's DNA combines with the father's DNA, and it creates a totally new set of DNA. So at no part is this owned by the mother or owned by the father. It is a new person. And I want to make a couple last points. If you are someone who believes that somehow a human fetus, every single human fetus, is not alive until it's viable, well, number one, what is a miscarriage then, right? People have miscarriages before viability. Mothers have miscarriage. What does that mean if a fetus isn't even alive before viability? Number two, in order to be logically consistent, you do have to be against abortion post-viability in order to be logically and ethically consistent. Number 3, what you are essentially saying is that every single pregnancy is an origin of life event, which is nonsense. It's just completely antithetical to science. You are basically saying that every single pregnancy, life is springing out of no life. Life is springing out of nothing. And sure, childbirth is absolutely miraculous. It seems like magic, but it's not. In fact, it is life combining with life to create new life. And that happens at fertilization. At no point in that cycle, again, barring miscarriage, some type of fatal disruption, at no point in that cycle is there just no life and then life springs out of nothing. That's not how it happens. So if you're claiming that a fetus is not alive before a certain arbitrary point, you are suggesting, in fact, that life springs out of nothing. Not what happens. Another point I want to offer to you is that even if you're somehow not sure whether a human fetus is alive before a certain arbitrary point, you should be, because we have the biology, the science to back that up. But I want to offer something philosophically to you. The potential should matter. You know, a human fetus is not like a kidney. It's not like a lung, right? It's not like anything else. If you put an egg, an unfertilized egg, or a sperm cell into a uterus, it's not going to magically grow into a whole new human being. But an embryo, a zygote, a fetus is. And that potential for everything, for greatness, for you, for me, that should matter to you. That should mean something to you. It shouldn't be treated like a parasite or a tumor or a scourge or something like that, because it's really not. And even if you're kind of iffy on the biology, the science, that should matter to you. Last point I want to make is just that there are only 2 points in which life could begin. Only 2. The rest of them are arbitrary. And that is fertilization and its birth. Everything between fertilization and birth is completely arbitrary. Because if you say, oh, we should only allow abortion, up until 12 weeks, well, what magical thing happens between 11 weeks and 6 days and a few hours or whatever and 12 weeks? Nothing magical happens. There are 2 very distinct markers, and one is fertilization and the other is birth. But in fact, you know as well as I do that a baby is not dead or not yet alive or not living prior to birth. You know that. So again, the only real, on a biological level, on an instinctual level, on a fundamental level, the only non-arbitrary point for when life begins is fertilization. That's the only non-arbitrary point. It is the moment that a sperm cell from the father fertilizes an egg cell from the mother, and an entirely new set of DNA is formed. That's not arbitrary. Everything from that moment up until birth is arbitrary. And of course, as I said, it would be absurd to claim that prior to birth, a baby 8, 9, 7 months is not yet alive. You know that. Nothing magical happens via the birth canal where a baby suddenly becomes human or suddenly becomes alive. So I just want to offer that to you. Hopefully this breakdown is helpful to you in your debates and your conversations with those of us who are still caught up in the lie of abortion.